Today's My Hero Academia theory is honestly one of the best theories you've ever heard. I will explain why it is possible that All For One is the reason Toya cannot use his fire quirk properly. There are so many similarities between Toya and Shigaraki. Both have been watched by All For One since they were born, because he wanted to make them one of his possible vessels. Both had a sudden change in their quirk. Both then suffered from a trauma that brought their dark personalities. Both were then picked up by All For One, who then took care of them. Both bodies were changed by Dr. Shigaraki. Both then became the seed for All For One. From both, their hair has turned white with time. And now that Deku is planning to save Shigaraki, making it impossible for All For One to merge with him, attention suddenly turns to Toya. This theory is that All For One will not merge with Shigaraki, but with Toya to become the ultimate demon lord of this world. Also, only a small percentage of the people who watch our videos are actually subscribed, so if you end up liking this video, consider subscribing. Please enjoy this video. Let's go! In the latest My Hero Academia events, all the attention seems to suddenly shift from Tomura Shigaraki to Toya Todoroki, with even All For One giving special importance to Toya. No one expected such a turn of events. It all started with the shocking revelation that Toya was found by All For One after nearly dying from his fatal injuries. Then it came to the fact that he was picked up and treated by All For One. While he was in a coma, All For One and his people made unknown changes to his body so that Toya could become a seed for All For One, just like Shigaraki is today. However, Toya was once again considered a failure because his body was not suitable for the fusion between him and All For One, because it was believed that he only had a month to live. But to everyone's surprise, Toya survived much longer than expected in a yet unknown way, without any sign of dying. That in turn makes him a prime candidate for All For One. Of course, his body suffers from the injuries caused by his own fire, but he doesn't die from it. That's the whole point. He just had to survive until All For One needed him. This was confirmed in the last My Hero Academia chapter when he basically performed a self-sacrifice attack, creating so much and so strong fire that should have surely cost him his life. But for mysterious reasons, he somehow survived it, making even the other heroes around him wonder how the hell that was even possible. And if that wasn't enough, there was also a mysterious light emanating from his chest. This suggests that the reason he survived must have something to do with the mysterious light. After all this happened, events immediately moved to All For One, suggesting that there may be an important connection between Toya and All For One. Of course, the change between Toya and All For One does not necessarily mean anything special, but the important thing is not the dynamics of what happened between the two fights, but rather what All For One began to say immediately after all the things we found out about Toya. All For One began to provoke Endeavor in a very interesting way by revealing things about Toya that we just heard from Toya himself. However, he additionally mentioned very interesting little details that could change everything we have ever believed about Boku no Hero Academia. All For One began with saying that he has always been fascinated by Endeavor's greed and lust for power. What All For One means by this is that his main goal is to find the perfect seed for his transformation into the ultimate demon lord of this world. In order to do that, he must fuse himself with a vessel that is currently believed to be Shigaraki, and Endeavor's lust for power is the perfect environment to find such a vessel. Shigaraki and Toya are the only two known characters who have such a sick minds that their enormous negative emotions allow them to steal one for all. We don't really have confirmation that Toya actually has enough negative emotions to steal one for all, but if there's another character apart from Shigaraki who has the necessary hatred, it can only be Toya. All For One then continues and says, "Why do you think Toya's body was never found?" And now think about it. When Shigaraki was young, we saw a mysterious man bringing him home who looks suspiciously like All For One. Right after that, Shigaraki suddenly developed a quirk that he used to kill his entire family. A quirk that has nothing to do with his parents or grandparents' genes. A quirk that no one expected Shigaraki to ever awaken. Why it was also very unlikely that he would awaken any quirk at all, because he was simply already too old. There was almost no hope left. This speaks to the fact that he may have received his decay quirk in an unnatural way. The idea is that All For One was the one who secretly gave Tomura the decay quirk, knowing that he would never be able to control such a quirk and thus destroy his entire family. This was thus the necessary step to make Tomura his puppet. And And after all that happened, All For One was then suddenly there to give Tomura a helping hand. Obviously, All For One was not there just by chance. Whoever believes that doesn't understand All For One and how he does things. It is simply impossible for All For One to know that Tomura will definitely awaken a late Quirk, and especially that he will do such a terrible thing to his own family. So it is likely that All For One planned everything that happened to Shigaraki just to make sure that Tomura would actually become one of his seeds one day. This is exactly what is typical of All For One. He picks heroes who stands in his way and turns their beloved next generation into his puppets as soon as he sees an opportunity. That's part of his evil personality, and what's more, he uses that against the heroes later, as he did with All Might and now Endeavor. And so it's not unlikely that he did the same with Toya. All For One has already confirmed that he has always had his eye on Endeavor's crazy experimental lust for power. So if All For One probably helped Tomura become a seed for him, why wouldn't he have done the same with Toya? Especially since All For One knew that sooner or later Endeavor would create a monster suitable as a vessel. At least that's what he expected. And due to the fact that All For One was also there when Toya almost died, just as he was suddenly there for Tomura, we could assume that it is possible that All For One not only waited for Endeavor to create a vessel for him, but also helped a little by using his own quirk to turn the fire prodigy Toya into the child who suddenly lost resistance to fire. And that is the point. That was not always the case. Before I continue with this My Hero Academia theory, please take a moment to leave a like and make sure to check our second channel where we upload all kind of funny videos, like reactions. The link is in the comments. Let's continue. From a young age, Toya was constantly trained by his father without any problems, and he was even quite eager to learn all of his father's techniques so that he could one day become a great hero. He never had any problems with resisting his own fire. This means that he had a quirk factor that protected him from using fire. This can be confirmed if we assume that although none of Endeavor's children were born at that time with the ideal hot and cold quirk that Endeavor actually hoped for, he was satisfied with Toya's fire and saw him able to surpass All Might even without ice, and only with his powerful fire, which he knew was stronger than his own. So he put his ambitions on his shoulders. Consider that Toya showed such a tremendous firepower, stronger than Endeavor's, that Endeavor ignored his goal of creating the ultimate quirk and focused on Toya's fire, while Toya had never burned himself during that time. So they could both train for quite a long time without incident. If a normal person who doesn't have a quirk factor were to use that kind of power, they would immediately get burned, which would be no different than what happened to Toya later, which is that he developed a quirk factor that was actually meant for an ice ability, and thus was no longer able to use fire without burning himself. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter if you have a normal body or a resistance to ice. If you play with fire and you are not protected, you will get burned. So the fact that he was able to use fire without any problem doesn't mean he didn't have a resistance to ice at the time, but that there was nothing wrong with his body and that he actually had a resistance against fire. This is actually very obvious. But then suddenly something happened. The situation changed drastically when Toya's red hair began to turn white and his body suffered burns every time he used his quirk. This happened all of a sudden from one day to the next. But things like that don't happen just like that without any outside influence. Toya had already developed his fire quirk and also his body. Everything was perfect. We can't ignore that. Endeavor and his wife then went to see a doctor to find out what was wrong with him. The doctor explained that while Toya had inherited a powerful fire quirk from his father, he had also inherited his mother's resistance to freezing cold, but not his father's resistance to heat, which means he gets burned when he uses his flames. But as I said, this is actually total nonsense. We have seen him obviously training with his father for a long time before this happened. So why the hell would anyone believe anything this doctor says? It's not like we can trust the doctors in My Hero Academia, right? So Endeavor thought Toya was a failure and suddenly stopped training him, theoretically doing exactly what All For One has been waiting for, and that is that Endeavor would create a perfect vessel for All For One. He was waiting for his seed to finally sprout, but maybe it just didn't come out the way he expected it to, so he decided to help a little bit, as he probably had with Shigaraki. We all know All For One very well. This is typical for his personality. Under no circumstances should any of the Todoroki children succeed before All For One has found his seed, because that would mean All For One will be empty-handed, and he does not like to go empty-handed. Toya was well on his way to making Endeavor happy. He accepted Toya as his successor and trained him as such, even though he is not what he initially planned. This probably did not please All For One, because it was not what he expected. You see what I mean? Now imagine that Toya was actually born a little differently than we know him today, and that All For One eventually became impatient. It is possible that All For One could have done something something to Toya without anyone noticing, which then led to his body suddenly not being able to withstand his fire. So the doctors believed that he had a genetic defect, because anyone would assume that it must be because ice and fire wanted to produce a child. This is a natural thought, but as explained earlier, this was not always the case. But if, for example, All For One gave Toya a quirk that affected his body in such a way that he could no longer resist his own fire, because the quirk that All For One gave him automatically affected Toya's body in that way, then that could be the explanation for why Toya went from being a fire prodigy to a child who could no longer use his own flames. Since his hair has suddenly turned white, we can naturally assume that it might have something to do with ice, since that is his mother's ability and she has white hair. Of course it is possible, maybe All For One did something with an ice quirk, who knows. But you know who else had their hair turn white after coming into contact with All For One in his dirty games? Shigaraki. He and Toya are the only people we know of who are capable of being a vessel for All For One. So did Toya's hair turn white because his genetics suddenly changed to that of an ice body and therefore he could no longer use fire? Or did his hair slowly turn white just as Shigaraki's hair also slowly turned white because All For One did something to him to make him one of his seeds? If that's really the case, then it makes sense why all this about Toya's past is suddenly revealed, because before that, it was clear that it was Shigaraki who was going to merge with All For One. But there's a huge problem with the plot here. Deku's goal is to save Shigaraki, because deep down Shigaraki is a crying child asking for help and waiting for a hero to finally save him. And Deku wants to be that hero. The idea is that Shigaraki will actually be saved and thus lose all the hatred that makes him the perfect vessel to steal One For All. So All For One will never be able to reach his final form if it were not for Toya. So I believe it could be that Deku is actually going to save Shigaraki, and instead of merging with Shigaraki, All For One will do the transformation with Toya. That could explain the light we saw a few chapters ago. If this theory is true, then it is likely that All For One will soon reveal this secret to Endeavor in order to completely destroy him mentally. This secret will then also be the reason why Horikoshi decided not to let Endeavor fight Toya, because he is facing something much worse soon, and that is to fight against the fusion between All For One and his son Toya. Let me know in the comments what you think of this amazing My Hero Academia theory. If you like this video, please leave a like, it really helps us a lot. And if you want to see more My Hero Academia videos, then subscribe to our channel with the notification bell activated so you don't miss any of our videos. We do weekly My Hero Academia reviews and sometimes theories. And don't forget to visit our second channel where we upload all kind of funny videos like reactions. The link is in the comments. Thanks for watching and have a great day. See you next time. Bye.